Welcome to the Athletic FC podcast with me, Ayo Akinwolere. It's still only June, but Liverpool have already been busy in the transfer market. Coming up, we'll break down Arne Slot's summer rebuild and ask, is there more to come? Right, with us today, we have our football correspondent, David Ornstein, and our Liverpool correspondent, James Pearce as well. David, let's get straight into this. Milos Kerkez is set to become Liverpool's fourth signing of the summer. I mean, they've been busy, haven't they?
They have indeed, and this is a signing that they had long pursued. It's not completed just yet. They had some technical bits and bobs to sort out, but as we know, he flew over to the UK from Belgrade to undergo his medical, and it's all just being finalised, so we can expect an announcement in due course. As far as we know, he was their top target to strengthen at left back, and it will be interesting to see what they do in terms of the other players there, Andy Robertson and Kostas Tsimikas. We know that Robertson was of interest to Atletico Madrid, and Tsimikas has also been linked with moves. But a deal worth, I think, around £40 million, and a player who we've all seen flourish since signing for Bournemouth, a signing that was completed by Richard Hughes when he was the sporting director at Bournemouth, and it complements their early business really well. It provides good balance to the team. They've got Jeremy Frimpong on the other side, and he'll compete with Conor Bradley and whoever else, Joe Gomez for the right back slot. And I think Liverpool fans are really impressed and excited by that release clause, so it was all very smoothly done. Then of course the jewel in the crown, the apple of their eye, is Florian Wirtz, and that piece of business is record breaking, done and dusted in time for pre-season. Very slick, you could say. I was going to say smart, but everybody knows that he's a top player, and that's no secret. It's more just worthy of applause that Liverpool have managed to pull off that deal and attract a player like Wirtz, to choose them over the likes of Bayern Munich, and there was some interest from Manchester City as well. So that's on top of Mamardashvili, who was a deal done a year ago in preparation for this summer, with Kelleher now going to Brentford. So Liverpool are set really nicely in terms of what the market looks like. They've spent, they've invested, but they've paid, values for all of those players that don't sort of make you turn around and raise an eyebrow or sort of express concern. And this is, not resting on your laurels after winning the Premier League title, but actually trying to strengthen and improve in areas they needed to, in areas they wanted to. And there will be further work, I'm sure. But now it's maybe time to pause and kind of assess the market, exactly what they want to do, some potential movements in and out, and take things from there. They are being admired by clubs elsewhere who are looking at them and sort of saying, that's best in class. That's how it should be done. Manchester City have done extremely well with their early business as well. It's got to be said. They're the two that I think stand out to me. And it sort of builds the foundations of a potentially another successful season at Anfield.
Yeah, for sure. James, look, it's only a month ago Liverpool lifted the Premier League trophy. And I guess that David stated a lot there in terms of, what kind of intent this signals. But, we were just talking before we started this pod, and just looking at the calibre of player that Liverpool are bringing in. You talk about Frimpong, you talk about Kerkez, you talk about, obviously, Florian Wirtz. There's an instinctive kind of idea here that these are sort of plug and play players, and actually, fingers crossed, these should be the players that should allow Liverpool to hit the ground running next season.
Yeah, it's really exciting, and it was kind of maybe one of the complaints that supporters had when Liverpool last won the league 5 years ago, that they didn't really properly kick on in terms of strengthening off the back of that, and maybe didn't do enough to ensure that was going to be the start of a really golden era. But I think it was pretty clear back end of the season that they had something special lined up, because I remember speaking to Virgil van Dijk in a mix zone, I think it was the week after he'd signed his contract extension, and he talked about how in those discussions he'd had with the club, he said, I know it's going to be a big summer for us. And then Arne Slot around the same time was talking about the possibility of adding new weapons. He said, as good as Liverpool have been, and of course they'd blown everyone else away in the title race, he talked about how he still felt too many games were too tight, and that there was a level that he wanted to take them to that they hadn't quite reached at times in matches. And then throw into the mix, after the final game of the season, Tom Werner, the Liverpool chairman, stopped and spoke to reporters and said, we owe it to the fans to ensure that this team is even better next season. And all those bold words have kind of been backed up with deeds so far, because it's been a kind of booming statement of intent.
I mean, James, Kerkez potentially following Jeremy Frimpong as a second fullback joining Liverpool. Does this signal a change of guard, a new era? Trent Alexander-Arnold's obviously gone, and there are conversations about Andy Robertson, who's been so big for Liverpool over the years, potentially going to Atletico Madrid.
Yeah, I think it shows kind of the evolution of the team. I think everyone knew when, and certainly this was discussed internally, that when they decided to kind of sit tight last summer and ignore the clamour and the outside noise, when you think of the reaction to them missing out on Zubamendi and not pursuing a plan B and only bringing in Chiesa, there was a lot of kind of discontent, and they kind of ignored that noise because it was like, well, actually, for a number of reasons, it makes sense to wait, because for a start, Slot was incredibly positive about the calibre of squad he was inheriting, as were Richard Hughes and Michael Edwards. They also, because there'd been so much change off the pitch, they thought, well, actually, there's a lot to be said for continuity on it. And of course, let's not forget that the Liverpool team that won the league the season just gone, the previous year, they'd been top with 8 games to go. It wasn't like they were miles off it. So, but despite all that, there was also this feeling of, this also wasn't a team built to keep on winning, that it would need some assistance and strengthening. And of course, Alexander-Arnold deciding to go to Real Madrid, that left a gaping kind of void in terms of creativity more than anything. And I think we've seen them plug that, already with, the Frimpong signing followed by Wirtz, and then of course we're kind of waiting for Andy Robertson's final decision. But if he does decide that he's not going to stay and fight for his place during that last year of his contract, then I think Kerkez is another one that's going to give them another dimension down that left-hand side, because he really impressed in the games against Liverpool season just gone. He's dynamic, he's combative, and he's I think Liverpool are going to be an even more exciting team to watch next season.
Yeah, David, I'm just thinking about money. Look, James has pointed it out, actually. Liverpool have been quiet in the last few windows, in fairness. But also, you think about the decent Champions League run. You think about revenue coming in and also money coming in from winning the Premier League. Are Liverpool fully stocked there? We're going to talk about potential future signings later, and also Wirtz. But are Liverpool financially in a good place based on those reasons exactly?
Well, I might defer to James on the specifics of the financials, because there have been losses, but that's okay. It's common at most clubs, as long as it's within reason. And Liverpool have kept their powder dry in terms of available cash to spend in recent markets. They took a lot of criticism and faced pressure at the time last summer when Martin Zubamendi was the main target. They didn't land him, and they retained the courage of their convictions that unless the right player was available, they wouldn't do anything. And they've shown that in the past, historically, like when they went for Virgil van Dijk. It didn't happen in the summer. It then became a possibility in January, executed it then, and to devastating effect. Nobody seems to do that better than Liverpool. They make the decisions that they believe are right for the club, whether people agree with that or not, and they stick by it. And fair play in that sense. And we did say it at the time, and a lot of people didn't like to hear it, but are now starting to appreciate it, to the hierarchy, sort of led by FSG, Michael Edwards as chief executive of football. They installed Richard Hughes as sporting director, David Woodfine as his assistant. Others like Will Spearman, who's so crucial on the data. Julian Ward obviously came back, and he's in that group of people as well. They got Barry Hunter on the recruitment side, who has been doing such good work over such a long period of time. Arne Slot fitted into that in terms of his way of thinking and working in like a really seamless way. And it's bearing fruit now. if you look at the outlay, it's significant. But, let's see what Liverpool are looking like at the end of the market, because you wouldn't be surprised if they bring in a lot of money for departures that don't damage the squad. So Jerome Quansah is on his way to Bayer Leverkusen for a significant fee, with a buyback possibility as well. They even managed to recoup a significant fee for Trent Alexander-Arnold, which very few expected when it seemed he would be departing as a free agent. Kelleher, money came in from Brentford. Let's see what happens with somebody like Harvey Elliott, who could raise significant funds if he is to depart. To the top of the pitch, Darwin Nunez. Liverpool turned down an offer from Saudi Arabia in January for around 70 million euros. That has set the market value in their mind. Napoli are leading the chase for him now. He's their top target. They've established contact with Liverpool to express their interest, and I think they're talking at their end about how to proceed with this, what levels they can go to, and Liverpool are sticking to that sort of valuation. If it's met, then I think there'll be celebrations around Anfield at managing to extract that sort of fee for a player who hasn't played a great deal of football. And even though his numbers are okay, he hasn't quite fulfilled the potential that many expected. It's a move that Darwin Nunez is thought to be keen on, and there are other suitors for him if for whatever reason that doesn't work out. Luis Diaz they're intent on keeping and using, even if he goes into the last 2 years of his contract and ultimately leaves as a free agent. And there are other areas that they could look to make money from. There's uncertainty with Ibrahima Konate, who's into his last 12 months of contract very soon, and there's no news on a new contract there. But Liverpool have shown they're relatively calm with those situations now. As you pointed out, with Salah, Van Dijk, Trent Alexander-Arnold, it hasn't massively detrimented their sort of on-field performance. And, they looked at bringing in Dean Howson from Bournemouth. He ended up going to Real Madrid. That would have been further sign of investment. So Liverpool, I'm trying to say here, is sort of balancing the books quite well on the whole. And it wouldn't surprise you, despite, potential further outlay and talk of strikers who might come in or, further additions, if by the time that market closes on the 1st of September, that they still look in good financial shape. And that's the way they've always tried to operate under this ownership. They've aimed for sustainability. And again, that's why, that they are looked upon by many in the market as being the kind of among the best in class.
Yeah, and James, just before we talk about Florian Wirtz, very quickly, we're talking about all these signings that Liverpool are bringing in this summer. Is this serendipitous, or was it all part of the plan? Because I'll be honest with you, not many people would have seen Liverpool winning the Premier League last season based on, so many different factors. Do you think this is all part of the plan to get them into this season and actually bolster the ranks?
Well, I think certainly there was always the plan internally that this summer would be a lot busier. But I think also exceeding expectations in the way they did and winning the Premier League in the way they did has probably opened up more opportunities than they thought was even possible. I think I know we're going to come on to talk about Wirtz, but I think that's the perfect example of that, because when I first spoke to people at Liverpool about Wirtz, the expectation was, well, of course, we admire him, we'd love to be part of the conversation, but we think he's going to Bayern Munich. But I think when you achieve what Liverpool achieved last season, and it was interesting listening to Wirtz even talk about it in his kind of introductory interview with the club website, talking about being absolutely blown away by those scenes at Anfield and over 1 million people on the streets of the city for a parade. I mean, where else in the world are you getting that? That adds another element to Liverpool's pulling power, and I think also the fact that we've seen Slot inherit, yes, a good squad, but take a lot of those players to the next level. I think that is a big selling point. And then you add to that the financial side of it, which of course, winning the Premier League is massively lucrative. Liverpool were back in the Champions League, which I think generated up to about £100 million as well. David's right, there were losses previously. I think for Klopp's last season, when of course Liverpool weren't in the Champions League, they lost just over £50 million. But the financial landscape for the club now is very, very different. The commercially, they are really now fulfilling their potential. We've got the new kit deal with Adidas kicking in this summer. A highly lucrative pre-season tour of the Far East coming up. So all of that helps Liverpool, as well as the fact they'd been quiet in the last few windows, to really kind of flex kind of a financial muscle that it feels like we probably haven't seen from them, probably since they had the Coutinho money to spend when that was invested in Van Dijk and Alisson.
Well, on Friday, Liverpool finally confirmed the signing of German international Florian Wirtz for a British transfer record of potentially £116 million with £100 million guaranteed. James, we've already flirted around the subject of how pivotal this player is for Liverpool, but I guess what kind of intent does it show that Liverpool are able to prize one of the best players in the world right now to Anfield?
Yeah, I think that's why it created such an incredible kind of wave of excitement amongst the fan base that but I was trying to kind of wrap my brains thinking what was it comparable to, and I think in an attacking signing perspective, I think you probably got to go back to when Liverpool signed Fernando Torres from Atletico Madrid in 2007 to kind of, obviously Liverpool have had some unbelievable attacking players since then, but when you look at a lot of the players who have gained kind of icon status, obviously Mohamed Salah being the greatest example, there wasn't, there were question marks over him, wouldn't he, because of what had happened at Chelsea. Liverpool had pretty much a clear run at Salah when he was at Roma. Same with Sadio Mane at Southampton. You think of Firmino when he came from Hoffenheim. These players traditionally, certainly for much of FSG's ownership, it's been about trying to find the next big thing and then elevating them and developing that player into the world-class bracket. But I think the difference with Wirtz, probably for the first time since Van Dijk and Alisson arrived, it is buying the finished article. Didi Hamann, who watches a lot more Bundesliga football than I do, in his job with Sky Germany, said he is the gem of German football. He said we don't have anyone better, and so I think that is why it is such a huge statement, because I think you kind of think, well, that just gives Liverpool such a kind of an extra edge, and I think anyone that's watched him play, it's a mouth-watering prospect, seeing him in the Premier League next season.
Yeah, David, let's just break it down and go deep inside the football club and understand that the job of a sporting director. Obviously, someone like Andrea Berta's come into Arsenal. I just want to get a sense from your perspective that the kind of work someone like Richard Hughes, sporting director at Liverpool, will have to do, and how influential he is when it comes to deals like this, getting it over the line. Often we talk about players having conversations with the coaches and managers, and then maybe there might be the icing on the cake, but the sporting director has to do a lot of that groundwork.
I think they're even more important. Of course, that's not to underestimate the role of a coach and manager. And it's a case-by-case basis. They're more or less influential managers, coaches in the transfer process, depending on the club and the circumstances, the player and the situation. But the sporting director is kind of the constant, unless you're at a club where the owner is really heavily involved and hands-on with the actual deals, and that does happen. Some don't even have sporting directors, but at a club like Liverpool, where there is one and they're given great authority in collaboration with the people above them, which is directly Michael Edwards on behalf of the ownership, and then in collaboration alongside him or sort of below David Woodfine, Richard Hughes will be like an absolutely critical figure in this, as he was at Bournemouth. Coming into Liverpool, it was a big step up. It was a new environment, and it was a really tough inherited position because Jurgen Klopp was leaving, had to lead the appointment of a new head coach. The three key expiring contracts were not on his watch, and he had to deal with them. And largely the early impressions of him in the public would be formed by the success of that managerial appointment and those three contract situations, and of course the transfer market. But, from early on, we were hearing from outside of Liverpool, and it's just us relaying our information, understanding journalism, that he was held in high regard for the work that he was doing, and to not necessarily just do what everybody says in football, which is just spend recklessly, which many of their rivals, you could say, have done. And you've seen the consequences of that. It's often about showing restraint and making the correct decisions. often the test of a sporting director is to be able to say no to things and preserve a club's money and to develop from within and find solutions that are not necessarily just found by jumping into the market. And so, if we go to the specifics of, say, the Wirtz situation, Richard Hughes and his opposite number, Simon Rolfs, at Bayer Leverkusen, were by the end in daily contact. Extremely respectful, extremely cordial. Don't forget they had been in touch about the Jeremy Frimpong situation, which, yes, was a release clause. And so in some situations, you don't talk club to club. You don't need to. In Spain, the player will go to La Liga and trigger his own clause, and then the club will come and pay it, like in the case of Thomas Partey when he joined Arsenal from Atletico Madrid. Well, in this case, it wasn't like that. There was very strong dialogue, and that served them well for the Wirtz negotiation. It served them well for the Quansah negotiation. And, painstaking hours go into these things, and it's not a one-person job. It's a collective effort, and from the due diligence, the data we mentioned earlier, somebody like Will Spearman and his team, to sort of more boots on the ground, eyes of somebody like Barry Hunter and his team. Dave Fallows was previously there. He's now departed. And they would have been watching players like Wirtz for many, many years. So let's not just attribute it to an individual. But the sort of sporting director brings that all together and negotiates, and there's a lot of importance on that, clearly, because they're dealing in huge numbers, and any kind of little win and being able to get things more in the direction you want is positive, especially when you're talking such vast numbers. So I think a guaranteed £100 million, which is what Liverpool are paying for Wirtz, is pretty sound when you're looking at such quality. And then it will be about potential add-ons up to 16 million on top, and if they get there, Liverpool, they'll be absolutely delighted, because there will be team and individual success over a long period of time, silverware, and it may one day come to be seen as a bargain.
Does this signal a different type of intent moving forward, this kind of signings, big money signings, when they need it the most? Because I'm thinking, Mo Salah won't be there forever. There's going to have to be a couple more big signings coming through Liverpool's door soon.
Yeah. I don't think this signals a change of approach from FSG. I think it just shows where they've managed to build the club up to, that they're now able to complete and attract those kind of deals like the Wirtz one, and stick into the same business model. Because it's not, I think some people assumed with like the Wirtz deal that it was like, well, they've suddenly, the self-sustaining business model has gone out the window. It's like that's not the case. We obviously talked before about why they've been able to fund it, and obviously the cost will be spread out over a number of years. But no, I just think it shows that they are incredibly serious about winning the Premier League title, being the start of a new golden era for Liverpool. That they're not resting on their laurels. They don't see it as just some kind of glorious one-off, and go back to thinking about maybe qualifying for the top four. They're ambitious. They want to keep on winning, and I know that John W. Henry, Mike Gordon, and Tom Werner talk about the virtuous circle, which basically just involves the more you build up a club, the more you generate from revenues, the more money there is that can be reinvested, and we've seen that. Probably the last 4 or 5 weeks have been the perfect example of that. When you look at Liverpool as like a superpower of football, really. When you look at the scenes at Anfield after the end of the season, or everything that's come with that in terms of the commercial benefits, the prize money from winning the Premier League. They're in the middle at the minute of 5 huge concert dates at Anfield, which again generates millions and millions of pounds. They had Bruce Springsteen and Paul McCartney on the pitch at Anfield a couple of weeks ago. And this all kind of feeds.
Not quite Beyonce though, I've got to say, but yeah, I like where you're going with that.
Weren't you there, James?
I was there for Dua Lipa last night. Yeah. That's...
One kiss is all it takes.
But yeah, I mean, and that all just adds to it, doesn't it? Because and then and also you look around there. I was at Anfield for that concert last night, and you look around and you think, as well, the other huge thing from the FSG era is that transformation of Anfield. When they bought the club, not far off 15 years ago now, and let's not forget, when they bought the club, the first game in charge was one of the most miserable Merseyside derby defeats in Liverpool's history. They were off the bottom of the Premier League on goal difference at the time, with Roy Hodgson in charge. And and the stadium dilemma was one of the biggest topics in terms of having to, there was almost a sense of, well, if Liverpool are ever going to get back to where they were, they're going to have to leave Anfield, they're going to have to build a new stadium. Yet they've redeveloped half of that ground. Capacity's been lifted, from 44,000 to 61,000. It is an elite arena where you've managed to keep the history and tradition. So yeah, I think what we've seen in terms of the outlay in the market so far just underlines where Liverpool are at as a club under FSG, and it's obviously had to be done not through being bankrolled by the riches of a nation state, but by being run as a very shrewd business. And I think key to that as well going forward is just go back over a year, and the first big part for FSG in terms of shaping the post-Klopp era was getting Michael Edwards back, and it's no great surprise that everything else fell into place after that, because they trust his judgment, his knowledge, and his expertise implicitly. And from his first reign as sporting director, and you'd have to say he's not really put a foot wrong since he's come back into the fold as FSG CEO of football.
All right, David, Liverpool potentially aren't done with signings, or should we expect more business in that respect? I'm urging to the name Alexander Isak, simply because if that happens to happen this transfer window, not that Liverpool have completed the window, but that would mean one of the greatest transfer windows for a team of all time.
You're not getting ahead of yourself there, Ayo, are you? It would be a really impressive window. However, there's a long way to go before that.
Always measured, David. Always measured. Had to temper me down a little bit. I'm just excited by it. Trust me.
Well, so of course, if and when Darwin Nunez departs, which we expect at some point this summer, it will leave something of a hole, but not entirely, because he wasn't playing a huge amount of football, and Liverpool were coping pretty well. They've also brought in Florian Wirtz, and so they have a new dynamic, many possibilities up there, whether they play him centrally, he plays wide, maybe Luis Diaz plays inside. They've got your Gakpos and various other options. Mo Salah is quite a mouth-watering prospect. The different things they could do up there, some great combinations in theory. It doesn't mean they won't sign a striker. I think I refer back to when I said they'll pause now and sort of assess the market and how it moves. Let's see what happens in the number 9 position elsewhere. You've got Arsenal looking at strengthening there, Chelsea still, despite signing Liam Delap, Manchester United and so on. The situation with Isak has been spoken about so much, and we don't want to sort of inflame it at all. Newcastle have no intention of selling him whatsoever. Their plan is to keep him. They would like to renew his contract. There's no sign of a renewal coming at this point, but they're in a strong position. They've got 3 years left on his terms. He's already being paid extremely well. I'm sure they would be prepared to take that higher. He's at the centre of this project that's Saudi-led and very ambitious. They'll be heading back into the Champions League next season, which gives him football at the top tier of European competition. And this season just gone, they've qualified for that competition and also won a trophy for the first time in a long time, and he was so crucial to that. He does look to be happy. We never know what happens behind the scenes. I don't know, but all we do know is what we see, and he's always got a smile on his face and he's always excelling when he's fit. If they were to be enticed into trading, the money would be huge. We've always heard around £150 million. We don't know that for certain. Maybe it's more, maybe it's less, but it would be eye-watering money, no doubt, and why not in the position that Newcastle are. And that's really even to just sort of get a conversation. Now, we don't know what his representatives are doing. Maybe they're entertaining possibilities. Maybe they're hearing from interested parties. We know about the admiration that has been long-standing from Mikel Arteta at Arsenal. We know that Liverpool have admiration for him, absolutely, and I'm sure others on their list as well. But there's no suggestion of any developments. So we can't play it up further than that. There have been rumours and reports regularly. I think it would take some encouragement from Newcastle, from the representatives from both, for clubs to really test the water and the resolve of Newcastle. And if that encouragement comes, you can imagine Liverpool trying. It doesn't mean they'll succeed. But they've got a lot of work to do at their own place to facilitate, a spend of that level. I would be shocked if any club was able to do that in terms of his suitors, like an Arsenal, a Liverpool, and so on, without shipping some players out to create the financial space, not just on the transfer fee, but also the salary.
Yeah, James, if Nunez does leave, I'm just looking at Liverpool beating Spurs 5-1 last season. Luis Diaz took that position. Often they've played with Jota in that position. Do Liverpool need a striker in that respect? Because they've got players, even wide players, that can play in that position, and they've managed to do without him for large chunks of the season.
Yeah, it's a tricky one, because I think do they need? Would they? I don't think you'd class kind of replacing Nunez as an absolute necessity because he didn't play a leading role. But I think, and I would share the concern, I think a lot of fans would be worried about not having sufficient depth in that department. That's why I think Liverpool would have to go and get a replacement. Now, of course, there's certain caveats there in terms of, where does Arne Slot see Diaz playing more as a false nine? I thought it worked at times last season. Of course, he scored that hat-trick against Leverkusen as a false nine. It didn't work so well against kind of low blocks with teams sitting deep to try and frustrate Liverpool. I mean, Diogo Jota, again, is a dilemma for Liverpool, because Jota, his quality is not in question, but he just misses so much football. And so that's an issue there, because if Diaz is more of a horses for courses type, kind of suits the number 9 position for certain games, not for others, if you can't count on Jota's fitness. And then, of course, there's a bit of a question mark at the minute over Chiesa as well. Is he going to return to Italy? Of course, Liverpool adamant that Diaz will be staying put. So yeah, I think Liverpool would need to source a replacement. I suppose there's also a little bit there in terms of where does Slot see Wirtz fitting in terms of, the people I've spoken to have said predominantly a 10, but he could play as kind of a false 9 or on the coming off the left side. So there's a lot of moving parts there, but yeah, I think if Liverpool were to sanction the sale of Nunez, I think you would want that kind of that depth to be retained by them sourcing a replacement, definitely.
Yeah, I'm just going to throw a couple of names at you, James. Mark Guehi, someone else we've seen links with Liverpool, and also Gerald Hato from Ajax as well. What are your thoughts on that one?
Yeah, I think there's certainly 2 players that Liverpool are interested in. I think Hato at Ajax. I think we wrote about him numerous times last season. The attraction there is he certainly fits the profile of what Liverpool have been looking for. I think you only have to look at the kind of young centre-backs they've pursued in the last few windows, where, it was Colwill 2 years ago when there was a question mark over whether he'd be staying at Chelsea. 12 months ago it was Yoro, who of course ended up going to Manchester United because he wanted guarantees about playing time, and Liverpool very much saw him as a longer-term project. And then, as David said, Huijsen at Bournemouth, who ended up being Real Madrid bound, Liverpool were interested in him. So Hato certainly kind of ticks those boxes in terms of the profile. I think with Guehi, so much will depend on what Palace would want for him, because he's not much older, but he's a few years older. I think he's nearly 25. And also the dynamic would be different, wouldn't it? I think if you're buying a young centre half who is almost happy to bide his time a bit, that is different to someone like Guehi, who, especially going with a World Cup on the horizon, would expect to be first choice. And would he back himself to get enough game time at Liverpool? if he was essentially having to play second fiddle initially to Konate and Van Dijk. But yeah, certainly there's no doubt with Quansah moving on to Leverkusen, Liverpool do have to be active to bring in another centre back, because there's no way you could go into the season just with Van Dijk, Konate, Gomez, and then potentially Endo as a kind of makeshift fourth option. That just wouldn't be enough given what the number of games that they'll be involved in.
Yeah, super quickly on the Quansah deal, David, is there a buyback option for Liverpool? And is that actually quite a smart move if he actually hits the ground running in the Bundesliga, gets some more European experience potentially, then you bring him back when he's a much more mature, much more interesting defender back to the team he left?
Yeah, that was a key element to the negotiation. And so the clubs agreed, and they still needed to finalise that buyback clause. And I think it was sort of critical to it getting over the line. Maybe it still is. I don't know exactly where that's up to. It was sort of outstanding somewhat at the time that we all reported that the clubs were in agreement. And yeah, it would be shrewd. It would be what the likes of Manchester City often do, buyback or sell-on clauses and that sort of thing. It gives Liverpool an element of control over the situation and the future. But of course, it would need the player to agree. And in many cases, the player doesn't want to go back to the club he was at before. They want to play elsewhere. And we don't know the intricacies of it all. It's not just the headline of buyback clause. There's often sort of circumstances and caveats within it about exactly how and what would make it possible. So without knowing the ins and outs, we can't talk about it with total certainty. But yeah, it's a part of the deal, and it's another. In theory, it's another clever move by Liverpool. But the whole deal, it appears to be good for all parties. Liverpool, the player who really needs to go out and have regular senior football now. He has club and international ambitions, and young players more than ever are not wanting to hang around and be bit part players. And Leverkusen get themselves a good central defender in a position they've been prioritising this summer. So yeah, win-win.
Yeah, another player very quickly before we wrap this up, James, who falls into that category David's just mentioned, young, wants first football, international, Harvey Elliott. So much had been made, I'd say even as far as a couple of seasons ago, as to where his future lies at Liverpool. Where do we see it? Because if he were to leave, that would be a massive loss for the club.
Yeah, it would be. He's certainly not a player that Liverpool are looking to move on. I think it was something that Slot touched upon at the back end of the season when he said he knew there were players on the fringes who, frustrated at a lack of game time, and he said, there's obviously decisions to be made there about are they willing to fight and go again and try and ensure they play a bigger part in 25, 26, and clearly Quansah has decided that he wants to move on. Elliott were waiting to see. I think the thing with Elliott, which I think is intriguing, is who is going to be able to pay and willing to pay what Liverpool would want for him, because he's incredibly gifted. He's 22 years of age. He's already played nearly 150 games for Liverpool. I think he's a £50 million player when you look at some of the figures banded around. And of course, if you're looking for that kind of fee to think about selling him, then the kind of the pool of possible suitors shrinks considerably. So yeah, I think some of the noises coming out of some of the interviews he's done at the under-21 Euros suggest that he's certainly pondering things and the idea of cutting his ties, of course, with a club he's supported since he was a really young kid. But I know it hurt him last season not playing more. I think he only made 6 starts in all competitions. Didn't start a Premier League game at all until after the title had been won. But he was also unfortunate because he broke a bone in his foot early on in the season, which really set him back, and he was playing catch up. And of course, because Liverpool had a lot less injuries in Slot's first season, and that midfield functioned so effectively, with that, the trio really of, Szoboszlai, McAllister, and Gravenberch, of course, an absolute revelation as the holding midfielder, and then Curtis Jones as the fourth option. Sadly, Harvey was left on the fringes.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just trying to take my goggles off here, but 50 million for Harvey Elliott. I mean, Guehi went to PSG for around 42. Are you rating him at that level, James? Real talk.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I mean, absolute like minimum of 40, but I think Liverpool would be looking at 50 million for him. So whether someone would be willing to pay that, I don't know. But he's 22 years of age, nearly 150 games for Liverpool. He's been part of two title winning teams. So yeah, and I think obviously Liverpool are still in a reasonably strong position in terms of the time he's got left on his contract. So yeah, and of course they don't want to sell. That's the other thing. I think it would be different if they were actively looking to kind of move him on.
Okay, fair enough. Let's leave it there. Gents, thank you so much for your time, David, James, and also thank you guys for watching. Don't forget to like the video and also subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and also leave us a comment as well. Why not? All right, that's it for now. We're back soon. If you want to watch more episodes of the show, please subscribe to the channel. We'll be joined by the likes of David Ornstein, Matt Slater, Adam Crafton, Carl Anker, and plenty more through the season. If you'd like to listen to the episodes in full in audio form, search The Athletic FC wherever you get your podcasts from.